Hey family, welcome back. Okay, so we're reading a little bit of Epicurus. He's a really brilliant guy. This is part of his principal doctrines. So, let's continue. All right, we're on number 7, which is the essential Epicurus list that he has, and it is, yeah, his principal doctrines. We're starting on number 7. Well, picking up where we left off. Some men wish to become esteemed and admired by everyone, thinking that in this way they would procure for themselves safety from others. Yeah, but yes, some people might think that through fame comes safety, but actually the paparazzi and like the tabloids and like envious people are all counterexamples to that, right? So you think unless you get safety, you can, as in you can afford, if you get money for it, for security and property, right? But as in the people, well, there's no guarantee, right? Therefore, if the life of such men is safe, they have received the good that comes from nature. If it is not safe, they do not have that for which they struggled at first by natural instinct. So that's a weird way to bring in nature. Got natural instinct and nature, and then esteem and admiration. Number 8. No pleasure is evil in itself, but the means of obtaining some pleasures bring in the work of troubles many times greater than the pleasures. Now, I disagree. There is pleasures that are evil, regardless. The most famous example that most philosophy teachers use is if somebody likes to crush kitten skulls, right? That's how they get pleasure. You would say, well, actually, that's evil. It's immoral, and that's evil in and of itself because it's cruelty, right? And cruelty linked to pleasure is thus evil. So I would disagree with Epicurus on that, essentially. And I wouldn't bring in the moral relativist argument with that. If every pleasure were condensed and existed for a long time throughout the entire organism or its most important parts, pleasures would never differ from one another. Well, they would differ in the ways and degrees and the context, even though they have an overlapping quality of sensory, participation. If the thing that beget pleasure in dissolute individuals could dispel their minds' fears about the heavens, death, and pain, and could still teach them the limits of desires, we would have no grounds for finding fault with the dissolute, since they would be filling themselves with pleasures from every source, and in no way suffering from pain or grief, which are evil. That's an interesting, complex little assertion there. If apprehensions about the heavens and our fear lest death concern us, as well as our failure to realize the limits of pains and desires, did not bother us, we would have no need of natural science. That's a funny thing to say. So, we wouldn't really favor or feel like we really needed natural science in our existence if we didn't have an inherent fear of heavens of space, and the size of it, the vastness of it, overwhelms us, and thus we have this urging to dig into natural science. That's interesting. It is impossible for anyone to dispel his fear over the most important matters. If he does not know what is the nature of the universe, but instead suspects something that happens in myth. Therefore, it is impossible to obtain unmitigated pleasures without natural science. So it's impossible for us to dispel our fear over, things that are extremely important. And if we don't know what the nature of the universe is, but we suspect something like that's linked to a myth, we kind of feel more subdued, I guess. But because of that, we need natural science to have mitigated pleasure. That's kind of, huh. There's no benefit in securing protection from men if things above and beneath the earth, and indeed all the limitless universe, are made matters for suspicion. So, because suspicion, fear, so if things that are beneath and above the earth are limitless and are made for suspicion, then there's not really a benefit to having humans to protect you. You shouldn't secure your protection from men because you're not going to get a benefit. Because if matters about what's in the earth and out of it cause suspicions in the population, there's not really a benefit for securing protection. I'm trying to link it all together. The ancients, very interesting way in which they speak. The most perfect means of securing safety from men, which arises, to some extent, from a certain power to expel, is the assurance that comes from quietude and withdrawal from the world. Well, I agree with that. So the perfect means of safety is to withdraw from it and kind of expel yourself in the solitude, away from the hustle and bustle. So basically like a hermit's life. Natural wealth is limited and easily obtained. The riches of idle fancies go on forever. Yes. Easy? I mean, I guess you can. Okay, here's a good example. Okay. So, here, I'm going to do a little argument thing. You could say it's someone would say, well, it's hard to get a job as a CEO and then get all the money. It's hard to start a mega corporation. But then somebody would say, who wants to be a little bit vulgar, they'd say, well, there's chicks who all they gotta do is open their legs and then get money. You know what I mean? So it's like, that's easily obtained, right? Mentally hard, maybe for some, but it's easily obtainable, right? You didn't have to climb Mount Everest for it. Interesting how he uses the word natural wealth. So idle fancies are like not real wealth within that logical framework. So the natural wealth is limited, but it can be easily obtained. Very interesting. In few instances does chance intrude upon the wise man, but reason has administered his great and most important affairs, and will continue to do so throughout his whole life. So chance is rare, and chance intruding upon wise people happens in few instances. Reason is administered. It's the great administration, and it's very important in most affairs. And this will happen throughout your life. Okay. He has such an interesting way of writing. Don't you think? I don't know, I do, I think so. The just man is most free of perturbation, while the unjust man is full of great disturbance. Some hide that, though. You gotta wonder. Maybe, maybe the illusion of, the unjust man is like with inner greater disturbance, but he looks maybe like he has it all. So it's kind of like an illusion or something. What do you think? It's very interesting. Okay. The pleasure in the flesh will not be increased when once the pain resulting from want is taken away, but only varied. Okay, so when you're injured, like let's say you have a scar, maybe some fresh stitches, and it hurts you and it hurts you and hurts you, and then once it stops, you'll feel like a sense of relief, but it varies. Okay. The limit of understanding as regards pleasure is obtained by a reflection on these same pleasures, and the sensation akin to them, which used to furnish the mind with its great fears. So furnishes the mind. So by reflecting on pleasure, you get sensations similar to them, and those sensations help you furnish your own fears. You gotta bounce back and forth in the ways in which they think. They go pink, pink, pink. Infinite time contains the same amount of pleasure as finite time, if one measures the limits of pleasure by reason. The flesh considers the limits of pleasure to be boundless, and only infinite time makes it possible. But the mind, having gained a reasonable understanding of the end and limit of the flesh, and having expelled fears about eternity, furnishes the complete life, and we no longer have any need for time without end. But the mind does not flee from pleasure, nor, when circumstances bring about the departure from life, does it take its leave as though falling short somehow of the best life. So flesh considers the limitations of pleasures, but flesh mistakenly maybe thinks it's boundless, and infinite time only makes boundless pleasures, but the mind, having gained a reasonable understanding at the end, limit of flesh. So at the end, when your flesh is finally no longer able to do what it has to do for your pleasure needs, you'll then, when it can't do it anymore, get reasonable understanding that that's it, and it's going to help you expel your fears about time and eternity, and then it'll help you make you feel like you've lived a complete life, you've had the furnished of a complete life, and then you'll realize that you no longer have a need to even think about time without end, and that the mind does not really run away from pleasure if circumstances make it happen when it's time for you to depart from your life, and it takes its leave by letting you have a sort of falling short of the best life. These ancients are interesting the way they think. He who understands the limits of life knows how easy it is to remove the pain that results from want and to make one's whole life complete. As a result, he does not need actions that bring strife in their wake. Oh. So if you know the limit of life and how easily you can reduce your suffering and pain that comes from, craving and wanting, you'll realize that the result of that, you don't need to have actions that bring strife. So actions that bring strife in their wake, you need to have understanding of the limits of life. You need to know it's easy to remove pain. The pain that is easy is the one that results from want. And then when you think about want, you have to think about one's whole life completely. It's like a little gym for your brain. Brilliant. Brilliant. What do you think, family? Epicurus is a very cool dude.